Hey guys, welcome back to another part. In this one, we're going to be rendering out our sequence finally. And I'll also talk about some of the render settings that you might want to look out for. And we'll finally render out the sequence. So let's go into Unreal Engine. In the last part, I told you to add some assets around where we haven't really added. And it looks like blank. So I've added a few assets around here. Although I do want some leaves around here. So let me just put this in pretty quickly. So select these, paint density, put this up, paint in around here. That covered the ground a little. Now I think this is okay. And to render our sequence out, you can click on this little icon over here and we'll get this movie render queue prompt. This is not enabled by default, which we have enabled earlier in the lecture. So here right now we have unsaved config over here. So if you have different sequences, what you can do is you can queue up different sequences right here. And right over here as well, if you have different levels for different sequences, you can choose which level it's using and which sequence it should be using here. And then you can queue everything and render out. But right now, we need to change some of the settings. So let's click on this unsaved config for now. Now this is being rendered in JPEG sequence right now, but we want high quality. So let's go do a PNG sequence. If you want an even higher quality than this, what you can do is you can render out an EXR sequence which has more option, which has more room for you to do color grading in DaVinci Resolve, but we're doing just basic color grading, so PNG sequence will do the job just fine. So we're going to click on PNG sequence. Another thing that is important is to use anti-aliasing right here. Now in anti-aliasing, what we want to use most of the time is the temporal sample count. This is basically a sample count to anti-alias the edges of your piece, your scene, your assets. So the higher the sample count is, the more time it will take. The lesser it is, the less time it will take, but the lesser the quality will be. Usually even 16 sample count will do just fine, but for this one we want to use 32 sample counts. And once we change this temporal sample count, don't forget to turn on overwrite anti-aliasing, or else it won't work. Now as for the other things, anti-aliasing mode should be none. Now it is very important for Unreal Engine to warm up before it starts to render all of your sequences, because Unreal Engine is a game engine, therefore the loading time is quite long, to put it in a simpler terms. So if you render without any warm-ups, sometimes you'll face some problems with some effects, some animations. So it is better for you to add at least 120 frames for render warm-up count and engine warm-up count 120 as well. This is like the sweet spot for warm-ups. Now let's go into our output over here. We can change what resolution that we want this to be output into. And we kind of want, for me at least, I want a 4K render. So for 4K render, you want to change this to 4K resolution. But the thing is, we are using a 2.39 crop. So if you want, you can search it up on Google what 2.39 crop is for different resolutions. But in our case, if we want to render out 4K, we can just do 4096 and then 1716. That will be our cropped resolution. And here we're going to be outputting 24 frames per second, but if you're using different timeline but you want to use different output frame, you can just click on this and change your frame rate over here. But I'm just going to leave it as off And that is how we're going to be rendering out our animation. So as for the resolution, if you're not using any sort of cropped frame, if you're just using the standard 16:9, you can just use with standard resolutions such as 1920 to 1080 or 2560 to 1440 for 2K. So all these things that you can do, you can search it up on Google for the exact resolution that you might need. But in our case, 1496 to 1716 should be just fine. One quick thing to know is that for every single different render settings might differ from each other. So it is best for you to test out what render settings work the best for this particular animation that you're doing. And in certain cases, you will need a console variable for you to type in some of the commands to get a different look. It is quite important for you to do so, but for our case, this is just a basic animation. We don't really need it, so let's turn it off. Another thing you might want to do is go into game overrides, and you want to turn on cinematic quality settings and all these default stuff. That should be fine. We're not using any streaming, so it will load everything into your GPU at once and start rendering everything in full quality. Now you can save these config files as well. You can just save as preset, and the next time you render things, you can just select the settings that you want to render out with and then just click on accept. But we need to change our output directory. I forgot about that. So let's go into wherever you want to save your UE renders to. I'm gonna make a new folder. Let's call it Abandoned Church. Here we're gonna save it as this. Actually, I want to make another folder called renders. So let's select this folder. Now everything will be rendered into that folder. So click on accept. Now we have the output correct, render settings correct, and the last thing you need to do is just click on render local. So let's click on that. Now it will compile shaders the first time you render things, so that it will take a while, and then it will start rendering. You can see engine warm-up frames, so it will start rendering the warm-up frames first, and then it will start rendering each frame individually until it finishes. So I think that is it for the rendering part. You just wait for it for a while, and then we'll get to the next part shortly.